Okay. And I think so. Help me understand. I obviously there's been a lot of controversy around the idea of sort of conversion therapy. And I remember, 20, 30 years ago, there was sort of an open question. I think a lot of this has to do with, is this discredited that's even possible? Are people sort of cemented, like you were describing that slow hardening cement? Is this something that's just so cemented that it's just inappropriate and actually damaging to try to help anyone, even if their desire is to move in a heterosexual direction. That itself is going to do damage. And so you have these laws that were passed, I guess, I know there was a lot of, it sounds like a state by state against anything. And I remember there was ministries at the time, like Exodus, that you would send your kids to. And there was so much media around it. And I feel like there was a sudden like shift in the Overton window. People are familiar with that idea, like where what is acceptable to talk about? And so this was like an open question. Like, is this a good idea? Does this work? Is this damaging? It was an open conversation. Then all of a sudden, 10, 15 years ago, it closed like and locked. And I never heard the conversation again really come up. It was like, no, we settled this. This is always wrong. And so, yeah, give me some nuance in terms of like what happened. Anything you would say about sort of that story that occurred over the last 20, 30 years, how the language has changed and where things are at today. Where would you say we're at in terms of having maybe an open conversation around is it appropriate to to enter into any kind of therapeutic relationship in which the hope is to put more weight on somebody's heterosexual feelings as opposed to same-sex attraction?
Okay, so I think in order to set the stage for how it could be done in an ethical way, we have to start by defining some terms. One is change. When we talk about change, we're not talking about flipping a light switch from gay to straight. And critics of the kind of therapy that I do would claim that these therapy, that my therapy or therapies like it are we're holding out a promise that we're going to flip the switch. This is not about flipping a switch. We're not flipping a light switch. We're talking about rotating a light dimmer. We're talking about gradual degrees of varying kinds. They're different for each person. So we should define what change means at the outset. We should also think about how everybody should be free to find therapy and support to help them achieve their desired goals and outcomes. So when we're talking about client-led therapy, the client is leading it. The therapist is not making promises about any outcome, regardless of any marital therapy, any kind of therapy. The therapist, I think, should not be making guarantees of outcome. And when we understand that change is on degrees of the spectrum rather than categorical, like flipping a light switch, then I think we can start to approach the topic of looking at how some therapies do seem to shift sexuality. And so there are new studies coming out saying that yes, sexuality does change for some people. And what's very interesting about the new studies is that we're seeing that sexuality change is coming as a byproduct of other processes.
Hmm.
Now, this was not going on in the ex-gay ministries 10 or 15 years ago. In
Okay.
the ex-gay ministries, I think you were alluding to, sexuality change was the goal. That's the focus. That's the guarantee. Now we're seeing that there's from new neuroscientific data that, again, anyone who's interested, go to reintegrativetherapy.com, click on science, and see what I'm talking about. But there are other things that people can do, such as trauma treatment, as one example. And these other things that we're doing are causing shifts in sexuality as a byproduct, spontaneous byproduct. And those shifts appear to be lasting. So the next study that's coming out in a week or two, whenever soon, is a randomized placebo-controlled study that we did. And we did 2 follow-ups to make sure that these effects are lasting. And the methods that we used that we compared against placebo were all methods where people were not trying to change their sexuality. The effects were happening on their own.